Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Thank you for being here and for your great work. And many of my colleagues are focusing upon Nord Stream 2 and its geopolitical implications. I want to discuss our own complicity in contributing to the financial engine powering Putin's destabilizing behavior, our addiction to Russian oil in the United States. According to the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, roughly 80% of Russian oil and gas revenues come from oil, while only 20% come from natural gas. The United States imported more than 800,000 barrels of Russian oil a day on average in June of 2021. And the price of that oil is skyrocketing. Russia is now the United States' #2 supplier of crude oil and petroleum products in 2021. We only import more oil and petroleum products from Canada. Most years, anywhere from 1/3 to more than 1/2 of Russian federal revenue is the direct result of their fossil fuel exports and profits. And the roughly 800,000 barrels of oil per day that Americans import contribute to an estimated $20 billion annually in American dollars going directly into the pockets of Russian petro-oligarchs. Oil profits also fuel corrupt actions and human rights violations by Putin and his cronies, actions which have been detailed over years by investigative journalists and activists, including Alexei Navalny, who Putin is trying to brutally silence. And yet, we just continue to feed their revenues year to year by allowing their oil to flood our markets, and that oil is coming directly from Siberia to the United States of America and ultimately into the pockets of Putin and his cronies. Do the U.S. dollars that we spend on Russian oil contribute to Russia's ability to engage in abuses at home and malign activities throughout the region?
Well, Senator, thank you for all that. I think you know that the United States doesn't, and our suppliers don't buy, we're not engaged in contracts with countries. We buy oil on the open market. And there are certain kinds of heavy and dirty oil that we need in certain parts of the U.S. that Russia is a major supplier of. So I think your question is well put, whether in the context of where we know this revenue goes, those independent free market purchasers of that particular source might want to, how should we say, purvey their oil with a conscience.
Yeah, well, again, my concern is that while we talk about natural gas going into Europe, we actually import at least as much oil from Russia as well. And those revenues are going into the very same oligarchs' pockets and ultimately to Putin. So my concern here is that we understand this and that we start to think about how we can use those oil imports that go to the United States as a weapon back at Russia as well, as we're talking about sanctions, as we're talking about putting strong restrictions upon them. All of that oil that's coming into our country is something that I'm sure causes real bemusement to Putin knowing that. And I think the Germans are aware of it as well, that as we're trying to preach temperance from a bar stool. And we ourselves have to square up our own domestic oil policy, since so much of the revenues that Putin gets comes from American consumers at the pump. So when the construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline continues, it did so during the Trump administration, including even after sanctions were imposed by the United States. Is that correct?
So the vast majority of this pipeline, 90% of it, was constructed during the period of the Trump administration, and no sanctions were imposed until 2 or 3 days before President Biden took office. So there were many opportunities for the Trump administration to take action, which it did not take against Nord Stream 2.
Again, that when Joe Biden became president, the pipeline was over 90% complete already.
That's right.
Yeah, and so from my perspective, I just think it's very important for us to understand what the Trump administration was doing during those 4 years, and that we just not ignore the whole history that got us to this point. Thank you so much. Thanks for your great service. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cruz.